Much of the southern half of the UK is in the grip of this summer's second heatwave.
In this episode of Inside Art of Fishing, I've come out all by myself down to the south coast of Cornwall to have a little go on one of the local rock marks. Deep water, clear conditions today, really calm water on the whole, where I'm expecting the fishing to be really tough. We've had friends here just recently who did have a bit of a tough time, so I've come down with some ultralight tackle to see what I can do. So the fishing we're going to do today would come very much under the sort of LRF category, the light rock fishing category. So this is a style of fishing that I've done for many, many years, started in 2007, 8, 9 sort of period, where the likes of myself and a few of the guys in Jersey were starting to experiment with some of the lighter Japanese tackle on mostly what were rock marks at the time, just like this one. So the benefit of this tackle on the whole, and really that's why I got into it, was trying to think about higher levels of presentation. And that's ultimately what it's about. Catching fish when others might fail in very tough situations where everything seems against you in a way, and you could easily swear blind there's no fish there. But doing it right, gaining an upper hand in terms of presentation, thinking about lighter tackle and more precise ways of doing things can have such a massive impact on your fishing and the number of fish you catch. So on rock marks just like this one, plenty of deep water, we're expecting to catch pollock, mackerel, bass, these sorts of things. These aren't mini species, they are real fish in a way, for want of a better phrase. The bass anglers, anybody's going to enjoy catching. And it's the type of fishing that you can do when everything else is against you. Like I said, it might be that for most of us, we know our bass marks, we know when they fish, we know what conditions we're looking for, but so often those things don't combine. So you almost know with experience that you're not going to catch many fish that day, bass anyway. So having fishing like this, most people have something on their doorstep that you can apply these sorts of techniques to. It means that you can go fishing and you can actually catch some fish, which is ultimately what most of us want to do. But I think there's massive benefits to all of this, even within your bass fishing, if you're looking at it from that side of things, where you get to learn about lighter tackle. And I think this side of fishing, an LRF, as the more you go into it, the lighter everything gets, the more specific everything is, and the tiny percentages that differences in many things that you can do with the presentation makes your overall catch rate. And I think the lighter you come and the more experience you have in fishing lighter tackle, just like we're going to do today, the more you can apply that in different areas of your fishing as a whole. So it's a vast topic. It can get really technical if you want it to, but also it's just massive, massive fun. So let's go and do it. First fish of the day. Nice little pollock. Just getting around here a little bit. Whoops, there he goes. Whoa, I haven't run through the kelp. Don't know whether he'll come back out of there, to be honest. There he goes, nice little pollock, about a pound I suppose. It was one of those casts I kind of felt like it was going to be right, and actually it just happened to work for us. So well happy with that as a start for the day. Bigger than some of the pollock we catch on these little tiny jigs, to be honest. Like I said, not the biggest fish in the world, but on light rods like this, you could kind of see how much fun it was just trying to land the thing, because that's part of what this type of tackle is, just the fun element. It's lighter, you're feeling everything that's going on. Hopefully catching more fish, we'll see how it goes, but all good fun. So we'll pop him back and hopefully catch another. So we've got a nice little pollock just to get us off the mark. So I thought we'd just maybe run you through some of the bits, the lures, the tackle, the lines, etc. that we'd use for this sort of fishing. It's something I've done for a long time, so something I've managed overnight really prior to filming today to sort of rummage through various boxes and things and kind of pick out little bits and pieces that I've always loved and that obviously I'm willing to share with you as well. So the majority of this sort of fishing with these sorts of places revolves around maybe the little metal jigs, things like that. We do use some soft plastics as well. There's a couple of different types of lures though, even within the sort of metals category, that I find particularly useful for these sort of deeper water marks. So we have our normal little metal casting jigs, which are typically sort of relatively straight bars of metal in a way, with either single hooks, treble hooks, or even the little assist hooks that you'll see from time to time as well. There's little vibration baits, which are one that you don't see mentioned loads and loads these days, but these are very, very cool in places like this. And they're useful because when they're falling through the water, or when you're retrieving them, you can actually keep more tension on the line. So when you've got a bit of a crosswind like we've had today so far, it just enables you to kind of keep contact a little bit. Because they're so light, there's certain lures, whether they're soft plastics, whether they're standard jigs, they don't have a lot of resistance as they're coming through the water, so you don't always feel loads of what's going on. But the vibration bait, you can fish it slightly differently, which we'll explain in a little bit. And it kind of gives you that feel and that contact when everything else is kind of going against you a little bit in terms of the conditions. So you can still fish small, but you've actually got a bit more feeling as to what's going on. So a great little lure to kind of have in your box. Not one I use every day, but it's a really good, useful addition. And then I actually have little lures like this. This actually is I don't know what you'd call it. It's basically a little metal casting jig with a soft plastic on the back. It's kind of a different version of a cheb rig, we'd call it these days. So it's an articulated soft plastic, but it has and it gains the movement from the head that it effectively has. So the jig swims, and then actually the soft plastic wiggles behind it. So the whole thing works really, really well. There's different types of retrieves that I'll use for all three of these different types of lures, which we'll talk you through in a bit. But as far as lures and lure selections go, you don't need millions. I mean, the point of this type of fishing is that it may be something you don't do as even your main type of fishing or your hobby, but it's the perfect thing for these harder condition days when we know it's going to be tough. Tides, weathers, whatever, things just aren't right at certain times of the year. So having this option in your bag means you can go out to places like this and hopefully actually catch some fish where normal tactics would have really struggled. So having a quick look at things like, I'm going to start with the rod actually, because it's always my favorite talking point anyway. This is a graphite leader Corso. So this is an LRF rod technically, but it's a 7'10" model rated to 20 grams. So sounds obviously very much more like a light bass rod. There are differences. I mean, it has a solid tip. It's a slightly different style of lighter carbons and things like that. But it's almost a bit of a hybrid rod in a way. It's the sort of rod that sits between perhaps typical LRF and then our normal bass rods or RAS rods that we might use. But the ideal thing about it is that it's kind of means that in a situation like this where we don't really know what we're going to catch, it's going to handle, I hope, pretty much everything. Whether we do hook the odd RAS, whether even a decent bass turns up. And we've seen from the pollock actually that occasionally some of these better fish will properly dive. So you need something with a little bit of power on these rock marks to get the fish out. The length helps massively as well, with distance, and today really, really good example of how when the wind gets up, you need to be able to keep the tip down or control the line in different ways, in different directions even. It's almost an art in itself sometimes dealing with the wind when you're using light tackle. But it's the perfect sort of length, perfect sort of power as well to fish these metals. It can, although it's rated to 20, it can fish quite happily as low as 3 or potentially even a little bit less. So it's not a case of it being too heavy for the lures. It's more a case of having that extra bit of power should you need it, whether that's for the fish, whether that's for casting into the wind. Occasionally it means you can chuck on a bigger lure if you want to as well. So really versatile types of rods that whether you're an LRF angler who fishes these rocky headlands and kind of wants to go to that next step, perfect for that. Also, if you're a bass angler, it gives you a fun light rod that you potentially could even apply to other situations you're going to fish as well. So really versatile sort of tool. There's others like this that we sell as well, and to be honest, I've been in two minds recently as to which I was going to fish and why. This one I've gone for the fact that it has the solid tip, which is going to theoretically, on a day like today when I don't know really what to expect, I can chuck on a very light jig head and a little soft plastic and still kind of have a little bit more control and feel as to what it's doing. So great all-rounder really. Reels, I mean this one, I've paired with a 2000 size tailwalk reel. It's probably a more typical sort of 2500 Daiwa size, possibly a Shimano. It's that sort of middle ground again really between our different styles of fishing. It'd be okay with a 2000 as well. Braid, I've got a 0.6 PE ghost and line on here. This is, again, at the very light end of bass fishing, heavier end of LRF, very much in the middle really, but perfect for, again, But I think people are sometimes put off, from the LRF side of things, put off some of these slightly thicker lines because they sound like they're going to be thick and not any good with a light lure. But like I say, with a 2 gram lure, this 0.6 PE line is brilliant still. So honestly, there's no downside to fishing 0.6. Casting absolutely miles with these little metal jigs. But again, it's a little bit like the rod in that by going for a 0.6 over something like a 0.3 or a 0.4 that you might normally use, if you're into the LRF side of things, then 0.6 just gives you more robustness, which again, in this scenario where you've got barnacles and you've got potentially bigger fish diving at your feet, it kind of means that you've got, again, that reliability that you might not get on typical lightweight LRF gear. So this type of fishing on these rugged rock marks is kind of almost has to be, I've sort of said actually for years, I've kind of called it like summer LRF because it's kind of when we do this sort of thing. These rock marks don't tend to fish great in the winter, so it's the summer time when we're catching mackerel, pollock, bass, things like that. The sort of the pelagic fish or whatever you want to call them, where they're not necessarily bottom dwelling smaller species. These are fish that are swimming and cruising around. So this sort of setup gives you the scope to catch all of those types of lures, reliability in your tackle. So amazingly light setup as well, which again is just part of this, is about the fun. And I think for me, really, when I get into it, what I enjoy about fishing tackle is the technical side of things. So it's trying to find, as a match angler, really from the coarse fishing side of things, trying to find little things that are going to make a difference. And this could almost come in as just sort of ultralight finesse saltwater fishing. You could call it anything. It doesn't have to be LRF. It's just light fishing. But the reason for that is not just about going out and fishing light for the hell of it. It's about fishing tackle that's going to give you a better level of presentation than you're going to get with your normal tackle, your normal bass gear, let's say. So I've fished millions of times over the years, I'm sure everybody has, where you leave having caught nothing and just swear blind that there were no fish there that day. But realistically, I think, especially when you get into the LRF side, you see that you catch fish nearly any day, anywhere. So I think more often than not, there's always some fish there. But the normal tackle we use is sometimes, I think, a bit overgunned in terms of persuading them to have a go. So this sort of setup is exactly what it's for. Hard conditions, getting to that next level in terms of presentation, which is ultimately what is going to make a difference. So we found, I think, a few patterns probably already today with the lures, which we'll explain in a bit, but it's just, let's go and have a little go. We'll show you how to fish these things as well. That's probably what we'll do next. So let's go and do that. So as I mentioned, we have, there's 3 typical metal lure types that are used for this style of fishing, and each of them I'd actually retrieve in a different way. So you might find that a different one obviously is going to be more successful on a different day. So it's always how fishing is. We never know which is going to obviously be most successful. Colours as well can vary and you'll have your own favourites. But certainly today, for example, we found a pink jig to be the only one actually we've caught anything on. So it's magic almost how it works some days. But this is the standard little metal casting jig. I mean, we're just casting them basically as far as you can in whichever direction you fancy fishing. I'll typically let them sink, but I've actually got a fish on, so I can't do that. That's nice when that works out, isn't it? This one's a mackerel, I think. Shows the power of the jig. Come on, fishy. Oh, there he goes. Oh, a decent one. Whoa, this is the thing with this style of fishing. Whoa. Mackerel all of a sudden become the most incredible fish to try and catch. I've got an 8-pound leader on this one, which I've done really just for durability, again, as much as anything. I mean, it's, again, light compared to a lot of our saltwater fishing, but heavy compared to a lot of LRF gear, because again, we're sort of sitting in the middle here. An 8-pound just gives me that durability, again, around the barnacles, around the rocks, and just enables you occasionally just to, hopefully if you're catching your bigger fish, to be able to grab the leader and obviously get the fishing a bit easier. So always good catching these things. Never give up. There we go. That's how you do it. Nice mackerel. I've actually pinched all the barbs down on my hooks here, so everything is nice and easy. And there he goes. Right, as I was saying, with these jigs, typically there's 3 different ways I fish these metals. One of them is a straight retrieve. I mean, obviously as basic as you can get, just allowing it to sink as far as you can and basically slowly winding, ideally just trying to keep it just off the bottom. But the other one, which is probably a little bit more complex in a way, is the sort of typical traditional sink and draw. So something that a lot of us may have done with mackerel feathers over the years, anything like that. We do a lot off the boat as well in a way. So this tactic or this method actually applies to so many different types of fishing that we do, whether you have a metal jig or whether you have a soft plastic on the end. So it's a case with us here anyway, casting as far as you can, let it sink as far as you dare. With a bit of time and experience, you get to be able to feel that point, obviously, where you might touch the bottom, and then you're basically lifting it and dropping it all the way back. The more sort of perhaps advanced version of it is that you're trying to keep in contact with it on the fall, but only doing so under minimal tension, because ideally I want it sinking in a straight line, but I also need to maintain some kind of contact with it so that I can feel just for a little bang on the way down, because that's all you're feeling with the takes when you're doing this. So it's not like the rod gets ripped out of your hands or anything like that. It's literally a little tap on the way down, and you notice it it's so got one watching what I was doing then. You notice it because it's so out of the ordinary in a way, but you basically, like I say, cast again, start again. We'll cast it out, we'll let it sink, lift the rod obviously to ideally bring the lure as far up through the water column as you can, and then we're basically lowering the rod tip, imagining the lure sinking through the water, lowering the rod tip at roughly the same sort of speed as you imagine it to be sinking, and then just slowly winding in the slack as you go. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of really get right, but it will, you'll kind of know when you've got it right, because you'll be able to feel that there won't be so much slack for a start. Like I say, you need a little bit of tension in the line, but it's those little bangs on the way down that you're really feeling for. And ideally you're fishing it, keeping it as low to the bottom as you can. If you go too quickly, you'll start to come up through the water column, and then you'll start perhaps to get less takes. Not always the case, because again, you might find that the fish are low or high. So really it's a case of trying to find the pattern. But it's a tactic that I think in these deeper water marks just enables you to cover so much ground, because you are, with every retrieve, you're covering ideally a big sort of like height within the water column. Whereas with a straight retrieve, you're just coming in on a flat plane and not covering so much water. So it's a great way of searching the water column, which is really the point of it, and I think why it's so successful. I think it helps that the fish just love to see a falling bait as well. So the next one, which we'll jump to, is the vibration baits, which I love. Lots of reasons to fish them, and I'll explain that in a sec. One of my favourite little types of metals over the decades or more now, 17 years I think I've been doing the LRF stuff, but is a little vibration bait, we call them. It's a little metal bladed bait, a little bit of a weight at the head end, so they swim through the water with a really high frequency vibration that you feel coming up through the line. Not actually a type of lure we see loads of in the UK really for sale these days for some reason, but this is a little EcoGear VX50 they're called. It's VX40, sorry. And lovely little lures that they are so aggressive in the water. I think they're one of those things that can really just annoy the fish into having a go sometimes. So on occasion, they can be really successful over the normal metal casting jigs even. You can sort of slow retrieve them and just retrieve in a straight line, but I've probably had most success over the years, a little bit like we were with the metal jigs, fishing them that sort of sink and draw style, but weirdly, I just find them much easier to control if I'm almost sweeping the rod downwards rather than upwards. You're sort of ripping them through the water, making them go brrr as they go, and then fishing it down. Sorry, thought I had a fish then. And they're, like I say, just something about them. So you are sort of lifting them and dropping them, but it's more like you're sort of ripping them and dropping them. So it's, like I say, you can just do it to the sides. It's nice and easy. Just long strokes typically, and then just allow it to fall, but winding like I was with the metal jig. So not a complex retrieve, but a really, really fun little lure to use sometimes that can catch you fish when others don't, to be honest. And actually there's one other benefit that we've kind of experienced today already, and that when you do have a little bit of a breeze blowing as well, this type of lure, you can actually, because of the way that it's fished with the rod tip low, which is great to keep the line out of the wind, because of the way that vibration is, well, because of the way the lure comes through the water, it creates more tension on your line. So you're kind of keeping in much better contact with it than you are with either a jig that's fluttering down or a light soft plastic that you're just straight retrieving. So a great lure to have in the box, if not many of them, just for those situations when nothing else is working. So really, really worth a try if you can get your hands on some. So the third type of metal that I use, I mean, it's a bit of a hybrid, it's a bit of a mixture really, is these little jigs with the soft plastic that I attach to the back. It's not something, you don't normally find them being sold like this, but obviously with the way that soft plastics are sold and how cheap they are, you can pretty much mix and match any type of lure you want. I'll quite happily do exactly this on the back of one of the metal casting jigs, the slimmer ones as well. And the benefit to that is that you, with a different type of retrieve that we'll talk about in a minute, you kind of actually have the head or the jig creating your swimming action to really make the soft plastic behind it just go mental, and the fish do really seem to love it. So it works especially well for pollock, but to be honest, you catch anything on it really. The nice thing about it as well is that it's actually very, very simple, because all you're doing in the case of this one is just retrieving. I mean, you're just winding it in. Again, let it sink as far as you dare. Depending on where you're fishing, obviously the depth will vary, and it's up to you obviously to try and figure out where or not the bottom is. Here is actually quite nice because we've got sort of various bits of kelp coming up, so I can feel the sort of knocks and bumps coming through the kelp without it just getting wedged in the rocks all the time. But it's just very slow, straight retrieve. I mean, I almost can't count while I'm talking, but it feels like it's probably one turn of the handle every 2 seconds or something like that, really. So not whatever, in a way, the heavier the jig is that you use, the faster you're going to have to wind to keep it off the bottom. So it actually just depends on the weight of the jig as to how fast you would wind. But ideally, you just want to keep it just off the bottom. Again, like I said earlier, you can mix and match a little bit. If you want to fish higher in the water column, just do that. I mean, it's obviously up to you depending on what you do and where you are. But just wind them in very slowly, ideally, keeping them as close to the bottom as you can. The takes are typically pretty easy to spot, just like that, which is always lovely. Oh, he's off. They just took themselves, so really lovely fishing, and just gives you, again, another option to play around with, because as much as we probably all say that sea fish are silly old creatures, especially the mackerel, it's weird how just certain little things can make a big difference sometimes. And that's why I think anybody that's ruling out the idea of owning some lighter tackle or considering it sometimes is actually just missing out on so much, because within the LRF side, which is really where it's come from, I suppose, we just see the tiniest things making the biggest differences, and it's relevant all the way up through. And I think probably there's a lot that we could do with our bass fishing that we maybe even don't right now, because we're not working enough on the small things sometimes that maybe could make a difference. So it's always fun experimenting, and that's the part that I love. So let's give it another go. So I'm just going to have one more cast just to sort of do our little outro for the day and fish, which is always nice. I can't complain. But obviously, hopefully in this video you've seen just what you can do with light tackle, to be honest. We had friends that came down to this particular spot a few days ago and actually really struggled with the more normal gear. So, whoa, incredible things. So it's just been lovely today to come down and catch so many fish. Have a lot of fun doing it, experiment a little bit, which, like I've said, is kind of what I enjoy the most. And to finish it off with another one is the way you'd want it, really. So let's get this one in, and then we'll head back up the rocks. Been some really decent mackerel around today. But this sort of tackle, whether you own a load already, whether you don't, give us a call if you've got any questions about this sort of thing, because I know it sits very much in between what a lot of people are using and already own. It's a great way of fishing, suited very well to this sort of location. So We've had a great day. Hope you've enjoyed watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.